Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to IDG Live. Today we are looking at House Reed, one of the most intriguing and mysterious houses in all of Westeros. It's also one of the houses we have to be upfront about that we know the least about. And just as a kind of like a quick fact, just to set the scene, we only know the names in the entire history of House Reed. We only know the names of 4 members, and those are the 4 people who are currently alive in the story, the 4 members of House Reed. Howland, Jiana, Jojen, and Maura. So those are the only 4 people we actually know the names of. But what we will do is I will start by setting a bit of the context for this house, setting out the things that we do know. Clearly, there's a lot of stuff that's going on in the story with Jojen and Maura. A lot of the stuff that happened with Howland Reed a few years earlier, around the time of the turning of Harrenhal, obviously going up to the Tower of Joy. And then we will also, I've got a couple of questions from our patrons about Jiana as well, the other member of House Reed. Let's kick off just by setting out, well, why don't I put the map back up? That's worked quite well before, hasn't it? Let's do that. This is quartermaster.info. Again, still don't know who produces this, but I tip my hat to them. It's an excellent website. I highly recommend you check it out yourself. What we've got here is a map of the bottom of the north. And the top of the main part of Westeros. The chunk of land in the middle there, the thin area there, is what is known as the neck. And the neck is the home to the Crannogmen. Now, we will use lots of these different terms almost interchangeably because House Reed is the ruling house of the Crannogmen. The Crannogmen are the people who live there in that part of the world. But what their exact structures are, it doesn't feel like it's the exact same as perhaps one of the normal houses of the north. They perhaps did not, even in the olden days, when everyone had kings, and they had a king as well. Allegedly, they did not even see it as like a king per se, so as much as a first among equals. But we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. The predecessors of House Reed are almost certainly first men who found themselves in this part of Westeros. Now, at this time, we are in not just even the Age of Heroes, this is the Dawn Age, and the stories we get from this time are to be taken with quite a big pinch of salt. George R. R. Martin has told us this many times over. So the exact iteration of events we do not know, but clearly there was at some point a huge event that we call the Hammer of the Waters, that sundered, if you go all the way down to the bottom of Westeros, sundered Westeros from Essos. The land bridge that went between Dawn and what we call the disputed lands these days over in Essos, that was broken down. And so there was no longer a way for people to come across except on the stepstones, island to island. Now, legend has it that what this was a huge bit of magic by the Children of the Forest, trying to stop humans coming into Westeros. That doesn't make complete sense because that would just stop more humans coming in, and the humans by that point were already there. However, they did this with some huge magic, and we get in the World of Ice and Fire, we get a couple of different versions of this. One says the magic took place in the Isle of Faces. Another one says it took place in the Neck. There's a castle in the Neck called Moat Cailin. Now, Moat Cailin is interesting because it's not, although it's associated with the Crannogmen, it's not their castle. Their castle is Greywater Watch. But in the Moat Cailin, allegedly in one of the towers, the Tower of the Children, it's still called, allegedly that is where this Hammer of the Waters happened. And the same spell, which maybe it was 2 spells. We don't know. These are just legends. The same spell which created or destroyed the land bridge also flooded the neck, making it all marshland and almost impassable. What you will see if you look at the map is that there is the road going through the neck, which is the King's Road, and that is the only overground route into the north. The rest of it, that land is marshy, and people disappear in there. The Crannogmen live there, but they live a very different lifestyle to most other houses. They feel like they've been, they are almost a race apart. In the same way you get like the mountain hill tribes you get in the Vale of Arryn and right up in the north of Westeros, they have their own cultures. They may technically be houses up there in the north of the north, but they don't really operate them as them. The same goes here for the Crannogmen. The Crannogmen culture and people are different. They're shorter. They're more wiry. They live on crannogs, hence Crannogmen. Crannogs, for those who don't know, are basically floating islands, usually man-made floating islands that you can build on and live on. So the legends, and there is definitely some truth in this, but the legends are that where they live shifts and moves around. That's why ravens can't find the Greywater Watch. Enemies come to try and hunt down the Crannogmen. They can't find them because they've just moved. And at some point, there was a Marsh King. They were ruled over by what was known as the Marsh King. There were lots of these different kings in the north at the time, and the Starks, one by one, took on each of these different kings. And what happened with the Marsh King, we're not told huge amounts of detail. The Starks killed the Marsh King, and then I think it was Roderick Stark, he married the Marsh King's daughter, and from that moment on, the House Reed, the Crannogmen, paid fealty to the Starks. And they have been very loyal to the Starks over a very long period of time. But we don't know any real history of them for thousands of years, all the way through to pretty much the present day, when we get the story, and we'll go through the story in more detail, of Howland Reed, who paddled out from Greywater Watch down to the Isle of Faces, spent some time in the Isle of Faces, then arrived at Harrenhal, where he met the Starks, the 4 Stark siblings that we all, Lyanna and Benjen and Brandon and Ned. And he met all of them, and he became good friends with Ned Stark. He followed him to war, and at the end of the war, he went with Ned and 5 others to the Tower of Joy. He and Ned, we're told, are the only 2 of those who walked away alive. So after that, he disappeared back up to the neck, Howland Reed, and he has not been seen from since. So he knows all of the secrets about what happened during that time, or many of the secrets. George R. R. Martin has said that when we would never get a POV from his perspective because he just knows too much, but he will appear at some point in this story. So he disappeared. He doesn't die during this intervening 15 years or so, and we hear that Ned occasionally sends messages down to him. No Crannogmen ever come up there, but it's very well known by Ned Stark's children that he absolutely trusts and values Howland Reed and the Crannogmen. Howland Reed married, had 2 children, Mira and Jojen, and then they come into the story partway through when Ned has died, and the House Reed, like all the other houses, have to come and pay fealty to the new lord, new king, Rob, as it were. They're in his absence to Bran, and Jojen and Maura head up. They've also got a mission from their father, and as we know, head further north with Bran eventually ending up at Bloodraven's cave. And that is the extent of our information about House Reed. A lot of that, as I've said, is what has happened in the last few years of the story. But they have been there for a very, very long time. And they have been loyal to the Starks for a very, very long time. And they've been leading their own life. It's fair to say that Crannogmen have not the best of reputations around Westeros. They're generally deemed to have quite sneaky tactics because, understandably, they use the terrain that they know better than anyone else to their advantage, and they hide and shoot from the shadows and from the Crannogs and lure people into their swamp where they die. They can't do farming in the way that most of the rest of Westeros does farming, so their diet is very different. They get a whole load of slurs like frog eaters and they're like mud men, and they look slightly different. As I say, they're shorter, they're more wiry, and hardly anyone ever sees them. They spend most of their time in the neck and they do not go out. So this is part of the reason why I'm sure they have quite a bad reputation, is that there are actually very few that anybody knows. And that, as I say, is pretty much it. I've got a lot of questions from my patrons. I'm going to work my way through them. I'll also try and pick up questions from the chat as we go through. But Maura Lee saying, here is wishing all who are celebrating a very happy Thanksgiving. Thank you, Robert, for all the content and the content on Patreon. Love to Dan the dog. Well, yes, if you are watching live and if you are American and celebrating, a very happy Thanksgiving to you. I am very thankful for you. So thank you very much. Maura, we've got another question from... Let me see if I can find it. Richard Smith saying, can't stick around this evening, but we'll watch on my way down to London tomorrow to see the British Library's fantasy literature exhibition. Yes, I saw some advertising for that. It looks quite amazing, actually. So I might try and nip across and see that myself. But yeah, I hope it is as good as it looks. Right, so let's go to Luna Cascade in the chat saying, why were the Crannogmen so despised and discriminated against? Many houses in Westeros practiced different cultures but weren't so disliked, so why the attitude? I think it's simply that they just didn't, they were mysterious and nobody knew them. Crannogmen did not come out. They stayed where they were. A lot of different houses had different practices, but you might know a person from that house. With the Crannogmen, they seemed very different. They looked different. They did things differently, and you hardly ever saw them. And it's a lot easier to discriminate against people if you don't actually know them. Right, let's go to some questions from my patrons. Well, Jay, first of all, saying, can you talk about the Hammer of the Water legend for the formation of the neck and when that might have happened? I sort of talked about that a bit in the introduction. Just to sort of elaborate a little bit on this, there are some more details that we do know. This has associated it with whichever version of this legend you go with. There are lots of sacrifices. So that's one thing. Another thing which is worth noting is Moat Cailin. We don't often talk about Moat Cailin as being like one of the most important castles, but it's very clear that from the legends, it was there a long, long time ago. This is well before Winterfell, well before the high tower was built. So maybe even before Storm's End, something like that. This is Moat Cailin is a very, very old castle, and now it's in a big state of disrepair because, as I say, it's not the Crannogman's castle. It is in their area, but it's not their castle. But it is still very usable, but it's very usable as a castle and defendable from attacks from the south, not attacks from the north. Question from Robert Cosina saying, good evening, fellow Robert. Hello, fellow Robert. Caught a stream after a while. Great topic. Thank you. Really looking forward to what Howland reveals in Wins, but I want to ask what you think about one fun theory that Maura is actually John's sister. Right. Well, it's a good question. I don't think so. And I don't think so in a number of reasons. One of which is I think I've got a much better idea of who Jiana Reed is, which I will come on to later, so I won't sort of go down that route right now. The argument in favor of it is that she is, we know, pretty much the same age as John and Rob. And all of these kind of characters who are born around the same time. George R. R. Martin doesn't give us exact dates and times. In that period, he keeps it deliberately vague, but he has said, yes, Mira's born around that sort of time. She's around that sort of age. So that's the sort of the first bit in favor. The second thing actually was a TV show thing. Ellie Kendrick, the actress who was playing Maura, her curly dark hair looks very similar to the very lustrous Jon Snow hair that we had from Kit Harington, and that sparked a lot of, well, are they supposed to be brother and sister ideas? But I think the biggest thing against this is that there's no finally, the other thing potentially in favor of it is that Howland Reed is part of this. We know that, and then he's saying this is his daughter who appeared about that time. So it could have happened, but there's no evidence for it, is the short answer. There's no clues or hints that this might be the case. Nothing. When Ned thinks back, he remembers a baby. He doesn't remember babies. When John gets lots of imagery associated with him, ice and fire imagery, dragon glass imagery, things that, ice dragon imagery, things that show his heritage. That's not the case with Maura. We don't get that at all. George R. R. Martin has not, and his writing style is to give us these kinds of hints beforehand. There's nothing there. So I think the short answer is I understand where this has come from, and we can't 100% say no, but I see no evidence for it. Brian Burns, first super chat, thank you, saying, why have the Starks allowed Moat Cailin to fall into such disrepair? Well, it's a really good question, and I don't think it's one we have a good answer for. The main thing is that it's the logic we're given anyway is that this is a defensive structure to defend the north against attacks from the south. That's its purpose. It's there. If you just imagine there's a road, and on the road is a castle, and in order to get from the south to the north, you have to go basically through the castle, and that is what it is. So if we stop thinking about it as just being a nice, pretty castle somewhere for a noble house to live in, it's not a house. It's not a castle where there's this a noble house based there who've always been there and they're looking after it. This is a defensive fort. And it's a defensive fort for one reason and one reason only, which is to defend the north from attack from the south. Now, after Aegon's conquest, the North no longer, in theory, had to worry about defending itself from the south. And if they had kept this fort up, if they'd kept it there, blocking the way for anyone who wants to come to the north, you have to come through our fortifications, we've put a wall up, you can't come in, that sends entirely the wrong message. So there may be more reasons than this, but that's the sort of the implication that we've been given, which is that this is a fortification to defend against a country or attack that is now no longer likely. And just to sort of actually tag on to that a little bit, what you'll notice just sort of in the sides of the first few chapters of the first half of Game of Thrones, Ned realizes that things are starting to get a little bit hairy, and he then sends to Moat Cailin. Okay, we need to get Moat Cailin defended, and also the other main entry point, which is White Harbour. He makes sure that the Mandalese have started keeping their fortifications up on White Harbour. So it's almost as if the Starks felt that they had to not maintain it because otherwise it would look bad. But the moment that it looks like war might happen, immediately they're having to get back onto the case. Luna Cascade. Hello, Robert. What's the most outrageous tinfoil theory or theories about the Reeds that I've heard? Oh, I don't know. Outrageous ones. Well, I don't know. I shall throw this one to the chat. I'm sure something will occur to me at some point soon, but I'll throw this to the chat. If you know some outrageous House Reed theories, it probably would be something about Howland Reed, I'd have thought, and what he did at the Tower of Joy, because he is, as we'll discuss in a bit, magical or likely to be magical in some way. That then opens up the possibility that he achieved things there that it's not just like a battle of some knights against some other knights. Film Cram saying best wishes, and to you. The Reeds swear oaths by older and more primitive elements. Do you think there's a link between their vassal House Fen and the Thens? Well, possibly. I don't think we have the Thens. For those who don't know, this is a group up in the far north, beyond the wall, sort of a clan, basically. The Magnar of Then is quite a significant character in Jon's life when he is north of the wall. Now, the first men, there was a wall built between them, the people in the far north and the not so far north. So it's possible that there's a link there, but I don't think I've seen any evidence for it one way or another. I will come back to this, I'm sure, several times. But you mentioned the pledge. This is the pledge when Mira and Jojen come to pledge themselves and their house to the Starks once more. This is what they say. Both of them together say, "To Winterfell we pledge the faith of Greywater." To Winterfell we pledge the faith of Greywater. Hearth and heart and harvest we yield up to you, my lord. Our swords and spears and arrows are yours to command. Grant mercy to our weak, help to our helpless, and justice to all, and we shall never fail you. And then Jojen says, "I swear it by earth and water." And Mira says, "I swear it by bronze and iron." And Mira and Jojen together say, "We swear it by ice and fire." Now, the ice and fire thing obviously gets everyone just going, "Oh, does this mean something?" I've read a long time ago suggestions, which were quite fun and convincing suggestions, that perhaps this is a link to the original pact that humans and the children of the forest made, because, as we'll get onto in a moment, the links between the children of the forest and humans are and Crannogmen are very strong. And obviously the two places where the rumours are that the Hammer of the Waters was cast from are in the Neck and on the Isle of Faces. The Isle of Faces being where the pact was signed. So the links are very strong between those places. Let's go to Matthew Hawkins from Patreon saying, "Hi, Robert. Do you think there may be a few children of the forest still residing in the Neck?" Now, this, I think, is a really interesting question because we do not know, because we don't know anyone who has been into the Neck and come back out again. Pretty much ever. It's, again, the similarities to the Isle of Faces. Yes, some people do, but if in terms of our characters that we know in the story, no, we don't know anyone that has done that, and you're told repeatedly, don't go off of the main path. But what's really interesting, I found when just sort of going through, looking at the children of the forest and how they're described, particularly in the world of Ice and Fire, if I were to put you on the spot right now and say, where do the children of the forest live? Where what sort of ground and territory do you think they are? I think instinctively most of us would say, well, in the forest, but also, yes, in caves, in hollow hills. Those are the two places that they live, which is true. But also, if you read the description in the world of Ice and Fire, it says this: the children of the forest resided in the woods, in crannogs, in bogs and marshes, and even in caverns and hollow hills. So the things that we think of are there, but right up near the top of the list are crannogs. Where's the only place that we know really where there are crannogs? In the Neck, in bogs and marshes. Where's the biggest bog and marsh in Westeros? It's in the Neck. And where's the if there are children of the forest anywhere, they have to be hidden somewhere that humans aren't really going. So might they still be there? We have absolutely zero evidence. But if they are anywhere in Westeros, there are two places. One of those is the Isle of Faces, and the other one is in the Neck. So I think possibly yes. I mean, there's a sort of a counter argument that they might not be, because Howland Reed left the Neck to go seeking more magic, basically, and to see the Green Men. And if the children of the forest had been in the Neck, then perhaps he wouldn't need to. He could have just stayed there, but we don't know that. Alejandro Martinez saying, "Good evening, Robert. If the children of the forest are living in caves, woods, secret tree towns, why would they use Moat Cailin for magic? Do you think House Reed knew?" Oh, okay. Well, this links perfectly to what I was just talking about. So they were living in those places, but also in crannogs and bogs and marshes. Why would they use Moat Cailin? Well, this is interesting. I mean, one of the theories, we get lots of theories about what the Hammer of the Waters is. One of the theories is that, first of all, they cut off Westeros from Essos, getting rid of that land bridge. And then at a second time, which is why we got these two legends of where the magic happened, a second time was trying to sort of cut off the north from the south. And that one didn't work quite as well. And so the first one from the Isle of Faces, stopping the land bridge, and the second one trying to flood the Neck, and they did that from a tall tower in the Neck, or just at the top of the Neck. So that is the argument why. The intriguing thing there is, as you say, does this mean that House Reed knew? We don't know, because we don't know the exact history of House Reed or exactly the Crannogmen. It's all very fuzzy. The fact that there's a castle there, if this was Moat Cailin, it seems to imply that humans maybe they did move in there beforehand, and then this got taken in by the Children of the Forest, or were the Children of the Forest and whoever owned Moat Cailin working hand in hand, or was it just the site of Moat Cailin and they built the castle afterwards? We don't have a very clear picture there. This is deliberate on George R. R. Martin's part. It's supposed to be slightly mysterious. The only thing I would just sort of add to all of this, I think, is that what we have to be looking for in the big history of Westeros is a huge magical event. This was on the back, the blurb on the back cover of Book 1, The Game of Thrones, that George R. R. Martin came up with. The first line is a preternatural magical event back in the mist of time. I can't remember the exact wording, but a preternatural magical event back a long time ago has set the seasons out of balance. And we often forget that this is the seasons are out of balance. This is wrong. There's something wrong with this planet, and it was caused by a magical event. Now, there's only two big things that we can point at in the legends, that possibly three, that might be it. One of them is the long night. One of them is the arrival of the others in some way, and another is this Hammer of the Waters, a magic that is so big that it can sunder one continent from another. So how we sort of put all of those things together, we haven't got enough. I'm sure plenty of people have got their own ideas about exactly how it happens, but we haven't got enough information to say exactly how it is. But I think they're definitely connected. I think that a huge magical event was the creation, the bringing of the others, whatever that happened. And I suspect this probably was also connected with what happened with the Hammer of the Waters. And the key thing, I think, is House Reed, or the predecessors of House Reed, almost certainly will have been involved in that. Lady Pushkin's saying, just sort of clarification, are the Reeds basically descendants of the Marsh King and the Starks? Well, you could argue that the Starks are the descendants of the Marsh King and the Starks as well, because the king, the Starks at the time, married the daughter of the Marsh King, and so the Stark family line also will have carried this same line down, but presumably House Reed will also be. We're only told of the one daughter, but maybe the Marsh King had more than one child, and that other child was where their House Reed came. Robert Cosina saying, there's a theory that Moat Cailin was built by the Deep Ones. Yeah, it's possible. So Moat Cailin is built from black stone, which is a cause of huge amounts of speculation in sort of the Song of Ice and Fire community. I will give you a very quick rundown of Blackstone. In terms of, there's 4 types of Blackstone. One is what we have at Moat Cailin, which is similar to sort of basalt as far as we can tell. It does look a bit shiny when it gets wet, but it's very different from slick Blackstone that we'll talk about in a moment. The second is fused Blackstone in big blocks, which we see in places like the Five Forts and the base of the High Tower. Then you get the dragon fused Blackstone, which is more intricate. The Valyrian roads, the great wall that you get going around, I forgot the name of the city now, big city on the south of Essos. So I always have a mind blank about something. And also you can find it in Dragonstone, intricate carved dragons. And then you get this slick, oily black stone that only appears in like 3 or 4 different places. One of which is the sea stone chair. We also get there's a statue of a toad on the Isle of Toads. So these appear to be different things, but they all seem relatively similar. But the deep ones, this is a sort of a George R. R. Martin nod to H.P. Lovecraft. They are kind of mentioned back in the mists of time, historical. They were there, the deep ones. They come from deep under the water. Perhaps they made it. It's possible. I think basically the origins of Moat Cailin are lost in the mist of time. Nobody knows who made it, but they do know it's really old. Samuel Sabo saying, why does no one go to the Isle of Faces? Well, we know 2 people who've been to the Isle of Faces. One of them is Adam Valarion, who we will be meeting presumably in House of the Dragon season 2. He's there in Fire and Blood, and the other person is Howland Reed. Now, why doesn't anyone else go there? Well, they can't. They're stopped. And this is just said in a very matter-of-fact way, both in the World of Ice and Fire book, also occasionally in different characters mentioning it in A Song of Ice and Fire. But if you try and get this, it's an island in the middle of a really big lake. And so if you're trying to go there, then the wind will start blowing you away. Or if you manage somehow to get a bit closer, then you'll suddenly find a flock of birds suddenly just start coming at you, dive bombing at you. Or the currents start moving your boat, moving it around to the other side of the island. You cannot get there. And so the only 2 ways you can get there is if they want you to, which is presumably what happened with Howland Reed, or if you fly a whopping great big dragon and land down on the island, which is what happened with Adam Valarion. So, yeah, I'm sure people will be interested, but you just can't get there. Lady Pushkin's asking if they import anything or if they just live off the land. Oh, that's a really interesting question. The latter. Really, we do get some mentions of poisons and the like coming out. The maesters learn about sort of lots of substances that the Crannogmen can like get from the plants that are only in the neck, things like that. But generally speaking, no, they subsist on what they can get in the neck, and you'll find that what they wear and what they use is all pretty much locally sourced. Which isn't to say that there's no trade. There probably is some trade, but generally speaking, not much. Let's go to a question from Magma Frost saying, hi Robert, the Crannogmen are said to have possibly interbred with the children of the forest, but do you think there is any compelling evidence that this is actually true? Or is it just as likely to be an aspect of the, for lack of a better phrase, racial discrimination they are often subject to? The same could be asked of some of the more magical abilities they're said to possess. Should it be taken as potentially true, or is it just racism against them, or from those with low opinion of both the Crannogmen and magic? And Jay also asked, to what extent do I think the Crannogmen have intermixed with the children of the forest? Well, we don't know because it's people do not go in there, but quite possibly, yeah. They are short. Crannogmen are short. Children of the forest are short. Children of the forest are quite wiry. So it kind of works. It kind of works, but we don't have any evidence. Now, the fact that there is magic of the Crannogmen, and there is clearly magic of the children of the forest, and that magic does seem quite similar, does sort of add to this. So it's quite suggestive. I think it's quite likely, but we haven't got any hard evidence for it one way or the other. Let's go to a question from Jonathan S. A few quick questions. What's your accent? Love it. Thank you very much. Do you consider IDG Live a success so far? Any update on the Roberts Rebellion trilogy? Right. So, well, accent, English, Southern English. And thank you very much. That's very kind of you. Do I consider IDG Live a success? If people enjoy what I'm producing, then yes, I consider it a success. So if you're here watching it, thank you. Any update on the Roberts Rebellion trilogy? I'm not entirely sure what you mean by the Roberts Rebellion trilogy. If you're meaning the TV show, we haven't got an update on anything to do with the Roberts Rebellion TV show. Right, let's go to question from Nicole Knox saying, hello and happy Thursday, Robert. Hello. I've always been confused by the geography of the neck and the Reed lands. If the only way to and from the north on land is via the neck, you would think people would know the Reeds and Greywater Watch more, staying there when traveling and so on. How have the Crannogmen managed to stay so isolated given their location? I know they say Greywater Watch moves, but even that has always confused me. It almost seems George is purposefully leaving things out. Just feel other POVs should know more about them, yet they are hardly ever mentioned in the main story. Seems like after the rebellion, they just went quiet and nobody thought to question. Okay, so I've got this map. Actually, I've had this map up all the time, haven't I? Just realised. But we can. I'll do the map and then I'll take it down. So the map. If you look at Greywater Watch, it's in the map. It's put there sort of in the middle, but as you say, it moves around. The King's Road, so the road which sort of runs through there, sort of along the right, as we're looking at on the eastern side of the neck, that is a causeway. So it's raised up above. We get all of the marshy stuff down there, and then it's this raised up causeway which goes all the way through. And on that, there's no Crannogman settlement. It's just a road that just goes across a causeway that just heads right across. And then sort of at some point, you then get to Moat Coleen, which sort of guards the way. Straddles the road, straddles the causeway. So if you want to get past Moat Coleen, you have to literally get down off of the causeway, wade out into the all of the boggy, crannoggy marshland, and just sort of wade your way through. And this is what, and that leaves you completely open to being shot at from the walls of Moat Coleen, which is why it's such a great defendable position. So the answer to why we don't have much more contact is that the causeway is away from where the Crannogman are. They keep an eye on the causeway. They see who's going to and fro, but they don't have like a little inn there or anything. They don't have a town on the causeway. They all live off in the marshland. So that's what's going on there. And none of the POV characters that we have been in there at all. So that's that. Let's go to question from Evan Berkowitz. Can you dig into the unusual oath of fealty that Reed's children offer Bran? Why is it the Reeds only? Why swear by earth or water, bronze and iron, ice and fire? Well, I read it out a little bit ago. It is different to the others. Bran is confused when they come and swear it. It seems quite clear that other people have sweared fealty to him, and those aren't the words they use. But Maester Lewin's, they're like, yeah, it's all right, don't worry. So this does seem to be just them. Now, if we dig into it, the words seem old because they are swearing by things like bronze and iron. And earth and water is very much, this is a Crannogman thing. You know, there are bits of earth, but there's lots of water. So that's their homeland. Bronze and iron, these are human things. So another way that you could compare this, because this isn't what the children of the forest would use, another thing you can do is you could say earth and water, the children of the forest are there, bronze and iron, this is humans, and then ice and fire is the coming together. Jojen says the earth and water, Mira says the bronze and iron, and then they both come together swearing it by ice and fire. So this is them showing the joining together of the children of the forest and humans with this swearing by ice and fire. Now, the ice and fire thing, obviously, it catches the eye because this is the Song of Ice and Fire, and it's one of only very, very few mentions of the phrase ice and fire like this in all of A Song of Ice and Fire. So this is deliberate by George R. R. Martin. Our attention is drawn to it. It's possible, if you do go back to this idea that this is the original pact between the children of the forest and humans, then you say, why would that be sworn by ice and fire? Well, ice is the others, and fire is how you destroy the whites, at least through fire. And so that it's sort of this idea that this could go all the way back to these promises which were made, this pact which was made all that time ago. As for the first bit, hearth and heart and harvest we yield up to you is, I mean, that's pretty standard. Our swords and spears and arrows are yours to command, again, pretty standard. Grant mercy to our weak, help to our helpless, and justice to all, and we shall never fail you. Is probably the more intriguing bit of that, because that feels almost like an agreement. It's not that, you know, the first two bits are, we're giving you everything that we need to be giving you. We're swearing fealty. You're our Lord. But then this is more of a bargain. If you help our helpless, if you provide justice, then we shall never fail you. The implication is, if you don't do those things, then we might fail you. So this feels a bit off because of these different elements, because it feels a sort of a negotiation, opposites and things in the second half. And in the first half, there's this element of almost more equals than just offering fealty. But the fact that it is allowed by Maester Lewin, who basically nods it in, that shows that this has been around for a long time. So, I mean, there's probably more I could unpack. Maybe I will do that another point. I might the kind of thing I could do a YouTube short about is to unpack it a little bit more. But hopefully that gives you a little bit of a flavour there. Reflective or rambling for Mikkel. Sorry, I'm just trying to work out who this was. So this is picking up a question from Mikkel. So thank you very much. I love it when people do that. Could the worldling Howland the Wanderer, he who walks alone, who we meet in one of the last Jon Snow chapters, actually be Howland Reed? Probably not. So it's possible. There's lots of people who are looking for Howland Reed in the books, understandably. And so we're trying to see, is there anybody who this might be? The Hooded Man, some people have suggested, could be Howland Reed. Howland the Wanderer does sound a bit like Howland Reed, doesn't it? But Howland Reed, we certainly know he was in the Neck. He was at home, and he sends his children up to Winterfell. So that's where he was to start with. If you pick any one of these characters who might be Howland Reed, then you have to say, well, why has he left? Why has he gone somewhere? Is it because, and the argument here is that it's because he has to tell Jon Snow who he is. But does he, or is he just waiting for the right time? The thing about Howland Reed, which maybe we'll come into, is that actually the neck, we've been talking all this time, we don't know what's going on in the neck, all very mysterious. People go in there, don't come back out again. People have gone into there now. They could be having a party in there with all the people who've been sort of headed into there, Stark loyalists who've gone into there. Mage Mormont and Gelbert Glover, who both witnessed Robb Stark's will, have gone into... Robb Stark sent them into the neck, sent them to find Howland Reed, and they haven't come back out again. That was part of his cunning plan to actually attack Moat Cailin, but came to nothing because obviously the Red Wedding happened. Similarly, we get Ned Stark's bones, which are heading north to the neck, and they didn't emerge the other side of the neck. And as far as we're aware, they didn't make it as far as Moat Cailin, so they have also gone into the neck and disappeared. So we've got them, plus Howland Reed being there already. We've got a group of people now, these Stark loyalists, now in the neck, who between them have huge amounts of information going on. Howland obviously knows who Jon Snow really is. We get Mage Mormont and Gelbert Glover, who knows what Robb Stark's will says, which basically says, hey, Jon now should be King of the North. And also we get Ned Stark's bones. So this all connects very closely in with Winterfell and who should be at Winterfell. So I think we will see some of those people emerge. Howland doesn't himself have to emerge yet. He can if he wants to. But I think this idea of him wandering off on his own doesn't quite work for me at the moment, because I think that he's got a role to be playing there in the neck. The Hammer Time 51. Welcome to channel membership here. I've got actually, I don't think I've mentioned this before. I've got channel membership open on both of these channels now. Don't feel you have to be channel members of both of them. It's just the best way to support this channel, if you wish to do so, is through Patreon. There'll be a link down there and other places. That's the best way. If for whatever reason you don't want to do that, channel membership here on YouTube is also great. And it does also mean, if you have it on this channel, that when I look at the chat, your name gets highlighted a little bit more, so you're a little bit more likely for me to spot your comment as it's flashing through, because a lot of comments go through. Christopher Bielemeier saying, do you agree that, and this is your first super chat, thank you very much, do you agree that Reed sounds a lot like a bastard name, a noun appropriate to the location like snow and sand and all the rest of it? It does, but also it sounds like a first men name. Now, the first men names are generally one syllable, very descriptive. So we've got Stark, Mud, Strong. There's lots of these kind of Reed, lots of these names which are very first men type names. Now you'll find that I have no idea where that thought was going, so apologies. I'll start again. Does it sound a bit like a bastard name? Yes, it does, but it also sounds a bit like as I say, a first men name. This is George R. Martin is not a philologist, so he doesn't go down this extent the same way that Tolkien would, for example. But this is very much a sort of a nod to the way that a lot of English place names, you can tell where they're from or when they were established by what the name is. So if something ends in Cester, that is Roman. because Chester was the Latin for town. But then you get a lot of older places have more Saxon names, which are a lot sort of Ware and Hole and Burr and things like that are a lot more single syllables and much more descriptive of the place itself and what is around you and the world and in touch with nature. So that's the kind of the feel that he's gone with that. The other one I'm just going to throw out there, if you want to go down, I think it is a tinfoil route, but it's quite a fun one, which is that a lot of the story so far increasingly is going to be about things like the Horn of Winter. Now, the Horn of Winter that we think we have got, Sam has got, it was in that, if you remember, that bundle of dragonglass and a horn that was discovered north of the wall. And we know that Sam has got it. We know that he's still got, he lost pretty much all of his possessions, but we're told he still has got this horn. And we're told intriguingly that this is broken. It's a broken horn. John and others, I think John tried, certainly somebody tried to blow the horn and it just would not work. And the tinfoil suggestion is, well, what might you use to make a wind instrument work? A reed. So is there a role here for House Reed in making the Horn of Winter work? It's possible. Another question from Luna Cascade. This is for recreational drama. Do you think Maura is still alive? Right. Oh, interesting question. So, yes, I do, but perhaps not as much as some people do. Now, what we had in the TV show was reasonably clear. We get so Jojen and Maura both go to the north, up to Bloodraven's cave. Jojen basically dies, and then Maura is the person who guides Bran back Hodor, sacrificing himself. Now, that is the kind of the working assumption I think that most of us have had with Bran for how Bran gets back down south, because Jojen, incidentally, he has had a vision, but Jojen's visions are pretty spot on, and he did have a vision that the Starks would return to Winterfell, and so I think it's fair to say that Bran will come back to Winterfell, and he won't be able to do it on his own. Somebody will need to go with him, and our working assumption has always been Maura is the person. There's also, I can go into this if you interested, another sort of theory out there called Jojen paste that suggests that Jojen may be dead. Bran has been given weirwood paste, this sort of very red, veiny, nasty substance that tastes sometimes very nice, very changeable flavor, but he consumes it, and that kind of opens up his third eye and his ability to be using the weirwood network. And we know that weirwood magic needs sacrifice, and we know that Jojen was very clear. Well, actually, I'm sort of going into the theory now. Anyway, Jojen was very clear several times during his story up to there that he knew he was going to the north to a three-eyed crow, but a couple of times when he was in danger, he said, "This is not the day I die," which made it very clear that he knew when he was going to die and it wasn't them. And then when he got up to the three-eyed crow's cave, Bloodraven's cave, he just seemed incredibly depressed. So the theory is perhaps he was the sacrifice. The idea that maybe Maura is dead as well, I think most people have sort of, I mean, I wouldn't say discounted, but they've not really thought about it. And the fact is that Bran having done all of his weirwood astral traveling, whatever you wish to call it, he goes back. Hodor takes him back to the cave, and actually one of the last things we see there is and Jojen and Mira were not there, and then we don't know about them afterwards. So is it possible that Mira has also been a sacrifice? I don't think so. I think she's just not there. But and it's possible. So Jojen was also muttering about wanting, or Mira said that he was muttering about wanting to go south. It's possible that she has decided to go south. She was not very happy either. Having got there, she wasn't really sure what the point of it all was. So possibly they decided to go exploring somewhere. So is she dead? Probably not, but I can't discount it. Shake Stars, thank you very much for your kind words in the chat. And Lady Pushkin saying weirwood magic needs sacrifice. Well, yeah, that's all we hear. Is that the Hammer of the Waters required hundreds, if not thousands, of people to be sacrificed. Weirwoods, we're told you would sacrifice before them. This is why still you get, when Bran goes back through the Weirwood network and looks out through the Weirwood tree, the oldest one he sees is a sacrifice before the Weirwood tree. It's noticeable, very small scale, but one of the first things we see with Ned is after he has executed the Night's Watchman who'd abandoned his post, understandably so. We saw what happened in the prologue, but he cleans his blade afterwards in the pool next to the weirwood. He's offering up effectively a sacrifice, a blood sacrifice to the weirwood. So that there's, yes, a long history of weirwood magic needs sacrifice. Right, let's go to questions from my patrons. Where have we got up to? I think Greywater Watch. Yeah, let's talk about that. So, Commander Ray, welcome to channel membership. Great to see you. Thank you very much. Alhad, what do you think Greywater Castle actually is? I don't think we'll ever visit there, but can you describe how you expect to see it? Well, I think castle, in our minds, castle is solid stone walls and things like that. I don't think that's what we're looking at here. We are probably looking at something more like Deepwood Motte, which is largely made out of wood. I think that we've got a large island which floats around. I imagine that they've probably got some non-magical means of moving it, long poles and things like that. But they have got a sort of a defendable structure, which is sort of the family home. Now, doesn't have to be too defendable, because its biggest defense is the fact that nobody can find it. But yes, I imagine this is made out from whatever they have locally in the neck, wood probably, and sort of I imagine it's actually probably quite cozy. So it's I don't think we should be thinking of sort of castle, solid stone castle walls. I think we're talking a wooden structure, not massive, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to move it around marshland. It would have to be in a big lake, so it's not going to be massive, but I think it's a large family home size. Basman is also asking about it, saying it is said that the castle sits atop a man-made floating island in the swamp. How much freedom of movement does the castle have, and what dictates where it moves to? Maura tells us that the Reed's enemies cannot find the castle, but what happens if the castle happens to float into a host trying to attack it? Well, so there's a few different elements there. How they propel it, maybe there's some magic, we don't know, but I imagine that this is, as I say, pushed around by poles and things like that. I think also it would not surprise me. This is all just in my mind, so you may have a different idea as well. But I think also it's probably disguisable from the outside. So I think I talk of like a wooden structure, a sort of a large family home size, but I imagine that from afar you wouldn't be able to tell. You would just sort of see what looks like a clump of trees or something like that. So I think this is disguised. How maneuverable is it? Well, the thing with Martians, as I say, it's not going to be, you can't take it everywhere because it's on an island, and the thing with marshland is that there will be trees and clumps of stuff and patches of ground here and there. So it can't go everywhere, but the implication is it can move around most of the neck. And as they know the area, they can, and as they will have scouts around the area, they're not just going to be pushing it straight into an incoming army or something like that. Martin S. Not meaning to sound sexist, I'm genuinely curious about this. How did Maura become the physical, combat-oriented one? Was she just more gifted at that than Jojen, with Jojen being more intellectual? Well, it's an interesting question. There is and I've got a question somewhere from one of my patrons, which sort of expands on this. We've got a very limited understanding of Crannogman culture, but there are a few indications that it's a bit more egalitarian, say, than other parts of the world. Now, one of these is definitely that Maura seems to be the more fighting, more hunting, and Jojen more cerebral, dreaming dreams. Although he can look after himself as well. He's good at fishing and things like that. Another one which is really intriguing is the way that they're introduced at Winterfell. They're introduced as the Lady Maura and her brother Jojen. Now, that implies that she's the more important. It implies that she's the heir, because normally you would introduce the main person and then the other person by relation to them. So if this was male preference primogeniture, if Jojen was the heir, then it would be Jojen and his sister Maura. But they'd said it the other way round, and nobody batted an eyelid, and so that seems to be what is known and accepted. So it's entirely possible that actually we get hidden within the marshland of the neck, we get this wonderfully free egalitarian civilization. We don't know, but the hints are there from what we do know that might well be the case. Let's go to a question from Corvus Corax about Greywater Watch again, saying, if it is a Crannog, will it stop moving once the water freezes in winter, and thus making Howland reachable by a POV, or is it more magical than that? So I think this is a really fascinating question. At some point, things will start freezing over. And we have to get out of the mindset of what we saw on the TV show about what winter is, which was a light dusting of snow across the north. Even in a normal-ish winter, we it was a cold one, but a normal-ish winter. Like, for example, just after the year of the full spring, we see that all the way down as far south as King's Landing. In King's Landing, the Red Keep had icicles coming from it. The Blackwater Rush was frozen over. Then you would expect all that much further north when you get to places like the Neck that, that will also freeze. So that should prevent the movement of places like of Crannogs, but not if they're magical, I guess. What it does mean, though, is that it might become more obvious if something's moved, if you're just like cutting a swathe through the ice with your movable island. So it's a really interesting question. I suspect it's one of those things that we don't know and we probably never will know. I don't think we will get a POV character. I mean, it's not likely, but we probably won't get a POV character going into the Neck. I'm just trying to think of an example of when and how that we might do, but it's more likely that characters come out from the Neck rather than anyone goes into it. Let's go to Robert Cosina. Your 10th super chat that gives me little pop-ups telling me things like this. Your 10th super chat, thank you very much. Just an idea. Could the Crannogmen be George R. R. Martin's hobbits? It's interesting. I mean, in stature, they're smaller. They're looked down on by everyone, not just physically, but everybody underestimates them. So there are some similarities there. But hobbits aren't really despised by other people. They just don't know about them, or they're ignored. Whereas Crannogmen outside of their area and outside of people like House Stark tend to really not like them. So I can see where you're coming from this, and there are some similarities. Yes, there's definitely an element of these people are the ones who are overlooked by everyone else, and actually they're really important. But they play a slightly different role here in that they're the guides for Bran. Jojen and Maura are the grown-ups, the adults. They're the wise ones. They're the ones who are figuring out how to do stuff, and he's going along with them, which is a different role to the hobbits. Let's go to a question from Dominic Vaughan, saying, "Hi, Robert. Hope you and Dan the dog are well." We are, thank you. My question is about Howland. Other than him potentially being used by the Old Gods or the Weirwood Network or Bloodraven as an agent for moving events along at Harrenhal, do you think he himself has any First Men magical abilities? Just going on the fact that Jojen has green dreams and that the Crannogmen seem to be more intrinsically linked to the magic of the Old Gods and the Children of the Forest. Yes, he does, or at least Maura says that he does. So she tells a story. This is one of the ways that we know about the tourney at Harrenhal, is that she tells a story, which sort of eventually this becomes the story of the Night of the Laughing Tree. But at the beginning of it, she's telling the story basically of Howland Reed, her father, who goes off on this adventure, and she says, and so he heads off to the Isle of Faces, and Bran's starting off, because Bran's obviously obsessed with magic, and he's asking, does he know any magic? And she says he could breathe mud and run on leaves and change earth to water and water to earth with no more than a whispered word. He could talk to trees and weave words and make castles appear and disappear. So it's possible that this is just flowery language for Crannogman tricks, things that they do, like making castles appear and disappear. You could very much interpret that as being you won't be able to see our castle because we can disguise it. Breathing mud and running on leaves is very much that, well, we know how to get through these parts of marshland and nobody else does. How? Oh, because we can breathe mud, we can run on leaves. That it has that kind of feel to it, but the way she says it is not really like that. It's like, yeah, these are the things he could do, and he was going looking for more magic. So I think we can say that although he's not himself a green seer, so to speak, he does have bits of magic. And if we take these literally, they are actually fascinating. This idea of changing earth to water and water to earth, talking to trees, I think we can all guess at what that might mean. Making castles appear and disappear. This is a complete long shot, but it's one of the links that some people have come up with to the Tower of Joy, which is one of the curious bits about what happened at the Tower of Joy after whatever fighting happened. Is Ned says, and I tore down the Tower of Joy completely. Stone by stone, and that is not part of his fever dream. That's not the sort of the fuzzy, hazy memory that may or may not be completely right. This is him thinking to himself what he did, and he says he tore it down stone by stone. And this was a tower, a stone tower, and as far as we're aware, or we're only told of him and Howland Reed. Now, you can go down a whole rabbit hole about there probably were other people, that almost certainly a whole load of horses, all they need is a bit of rope. This is still quite a big thing, but making castles disappear, that sounds very much like Howland Reed's kind of world. So yes, magical, but I think this is a different kind of magic to the kind of magic we sort of see elsewhere. It's very focused in on nature and the land, and a lot of it you might not. And this is very much a Tolkien thing, actually, as we were talking Tolkien a moment ago. Like elf magic, they don't consider it magic. The Crannogmen, what they do, some of it, the line between magic and non-magic might be quite fuzzy. Martin S, picking up a question for Luna Cascade. Thank you very much. Saying, do we know anything about the parentage of Jojen and Maura? Who was their mother? Was it a love match with Howland? Yeah, I've got a whole big question about that in... well, why don't we do this now, actually? Let's pick up across. King of Imps says, heyo, Robert. Hello. What can you tell us about Jiana, Howland Reed's wife? And can you tell us who she really is? And Lady Pushkin says, Jiana Reed, who is she? Yes. So, Jiana Reed, Jyana Reed. What do we know about her? Nothing. How do we know that she exists? Well, Jojen and Maura obviously had to have a mother. But we only read about her in the appendices. If you grab your copy of any of the books of A Song of Ice and Fire, the appendices at the back, and you flick through, you'll just get this long list of all of these names of different characters. When you get to House Reed, you just get this one. Well, you get the 4 lines. You get Howland Reed, you get Jiana Reed, and then the 2 children. And she's just said there, of the Crannogmen. That's it. So that is all we know. Now, does of the Crannogmen mean that she was originally a Crannog person that he married, or that she is now an adopted Crannog person? We don't know. But and I don't know, somebody somewhere probably asked this, linking this across to Gabriel Farrell, has a question saying, of all your theories, Howland and Ashara equals Mira is probably my favorite. It's a heady mix of left field tinfoil and strangely compelling evidence that is one of the best explanations of what happened to Ashara Dane that I have seen. In the years since you first released it, have you become more or less convinced of Mira's parentage? Is it something you would put your money on, or would you not be surprised if it turned out either way? Okay, so this is the spoiler here, is that my working theory is that Jiana Reed is actually Ashara Dane. Now, if it's the first time you hear that, it sounds incredibly random. And it's, well, where's this come from? You're just like picking two random characters and saying that they got together. But when you start going through it, things just... They kind of feel right. There's not one overarching bit of evidence that says this is definitely the case, this is definitely what happened. But it's what I sometimes describe, I try not to do theories so much as working hypotheses, which sounds like quite a nitpicky distinction. But the difference is that a working hypothesis is just saying, okay, of the information we have right now, what fits the best, what seems to make most sense based on what information we have right now. And it may well be that we'll get more information which will cause us to change our working hypothesis. But where we are right now, with the information we have right now, what seems to just fit the facts the best? And I think that this is one of those things where this fits the facts the best. So why do we think that? Well, first of all, Mira has got, if we assume, which I think is a fair assumption, that Mira is Howland's daughter, and she was born at roughly the same time as Jon Snow, Robb Stark, then we do need to find Mrs. Howland Reed, and we got Jiana. Now, we don't hear of her at all at any point during this story. That name does not appear at any point in the story. Anybody's recollections from Robert's Rebellion. Is it possible that Howland Reed kind of nipped off back home partway through this and went back to the Neck, hung out for a bit, then baby happened and he reappeared just in time to be going to the Tower of Joy? I guess you could argue that, but it makes a lot more sense given that we know, just in sort of offhand, he was with Ned Stark through the Robert's Rebellion, that very probably this was something that happened while he was out there in wider Westeros. So we're looking for somebody that he could have met, fallen in love with, and had a child with during that period. So that's the sort of the context of this. Now, did he meet Ashara Dane? Well, yes. Now, and I will bring you to at the turning at Harrenhal. She was there, and I will bring you to, as just the first bit of this just feels right. The first bit of evidence is the story. We've already mentioned it. The story that Mira told about the Night of the Laughing Tree. We remember this because of the Night of the Laughing Tree. Bran wanted a story about a night. She tells the story about a night. But it starts out, this is a story of a lad. That's how he's described. This is very clearly Howland Reed, this person. And he is the main person in this story. And so we see what happens to him going through the Isle of Faces, then going to the turning at Harrenhal. He got beaten up by those squires. Then the Night of the Laughing Tree appears. But before the Night of the Laughing Tree, we get this big meal, a feast in Harrenhal. And we get it described, and all of the other characters in this story are described with poetic names. So the Starks, for example, you get the she-wolf, the young pup, I can't remember what Ned was called now. He was the shy pup, perhaps something like the shy wolf. And then you get the Dragon Prince. That's Rhaegar. You get the White Swords. You get everybody gets given a name for based on their family and stuff like that, except for one person who is the maid. And the lad and the maid, the story structure here is that this is the story of how the lad met the maid, the only other character who is not given one of these kind of nicknames. It feels like a How I Met Your Mother story, because we get all of these other characters, but then you suddenly hear about the maid, and we hear about her eye color. We hear about how she looked. We hear about every single person that she danced with that night. And this story was told by Howland Reed. It's about Howland Reed. This story was told to his children. Now, given the timing of this, if this isn't a How I Met Your Mother story, this is a story that Howland Reed repeatedly told his children about how just before he met their mother, he met this really hot woman once at this dance, and this is what she looked like, and these are all the people she danced with. And that just feels a bit weird. It makes sense within context for this to be a How I Met Your Mother story. And some people say yes, but this is where Ned and Ashara got together. You look at the evidence underneath this. I'm going off quite a long digression on this. Apologies. I've got a whole video on it if you want to watch it in more detail. This is where Ned and Ashara got together. If you look at what the evidence is for that, it's just, we heard some noises coming from Ned's tent. She went into Ned's tent. We heard some noises coming from there. Okay. What other bit of information do we have? Ned let Howland share his tent. So this wasn't just Ned's tent, this was Howland's tent as well. And people overheard some noises coming from there. Okay, interesting. So you then take that as an idea. Well, maybe they got together. So Barristan, who had a massive crush on Ashara Dane, he basically says she then had to turn to the Starks for help. Why did she have to turn to the Starks for help? Well, perhaps it's because she got pregnant with Howland Reed's child. It's possible. You have to ask yourself what. I mean, so Barristan thinks she shamed herself. He's a man of very prudish morals. So we're building up this picture of it's entirely possible that's what happened. Then you get, if you fast forward all the way around to the Tower of Joy and afterwards, Ned says that Arthur Dane would have killed him but for Howland Reed. Now, perhaps Howland Reed killed Arthur Dane. That seems rather far-fetched. But he intervened somehow. How? Well, perhaps he was in love with Ashara Dane. And so this made him effectively brother-in-law to Arthur, and he just interceded on that basis. When we get further, we get Ned going to Starfall afterwards. We get told this is to return the sword Dawn, which, yes, they will be very thankful for. But what we find coming out from that is House Dane love Ned Stark. Absolutely adore him. They name their oldest son and heir after him. We meet Ned Dane in The Song of Ice and Fire, and he's obsessed. He's heard all these amazing things about Ned Stark. What has Ned done to earn this sort of incredible love and adoration from House Dane? Particularly if the reason why he's bringing the sword back is because, hey, I just killed Arthur. You know your son Arthur. But if you go down the route that Ned and Ashara got together, then Ashara committed suicide. You have to say that what you've got here is that Ned Stark fathers a child on Ashara Dane, then comes back to see her, tells her, I'm taking your child. I'm not going to tell anyone this is your child. She commits suicide over it. And then he heads away, having effectively killed both Ashara and Arthur. That's not the story of somebody who the House Dane would love and adore. What might make those facts fit together is if it wasn't Ned and Ashara, it was Howland and Ashara. And Ashara knew, House Dane knew, that they were in trouble because they had been Team Rhaegar, completely 100% Team Rhaegar. Everybody associated with Rhaegar was dead or exiled, disappeared. Absolutely everybody. Rhaegar himself was, Elia was dead. The two squires, Miles Mooton and Richard Lonmouth, that he'd had, both gone, disappeared, or dead. John Connington, a good friend of his, had been exiled. The Arthur Dane was dead. Oswald Went was dead. The only other person left here was Ashara Dane. And if there's a way out for this, could she be disappeared? And if Ned goes, okay, here's the deal. You can marry Howland Reed and you can disappear with him into the neck, as long as you never come out. You never tell anyone the story of what happened at the Tower of Joy. And I will smooth things over with Robert Baratheon. How's about that for a plan? And so Ashara and Howland and their child head off into the neck, never to be seen from again. So that is a story, as I say, it kind of, is there any direct evidence that this is the case? No, but it hangs together and it fits all the facts that we have got, and all of the other stories at the moment that could be there don't make as much sense. So it is my working hypothesis on what happened and who Jiana is, and sort of the last few bits, if you wish to sort of go down this route. The name Jiana itself, Jyana, Jiana, George R.R. Martin loves his wordplay. I did a short video recently about how I'm sure deliberately, Catelyn's two daughters are called at the moment Cat of the Canals, or at one point were called Cat of the Canals and Elaine. Catelyn's daughters. And what about Jiana? Well, this has to be a made-up name. What name would you do? Well, perhaps connection with Lyanna and John. Jiana. So if you want a little bit of wordplay there, if you want an explanation perhaps for why we were talking about this earlier, why the Crannogmen may have this slightly different approach to who inherits, where else in the Seven Kingdoms has got this, well, the eldest inherits regardless of whether they're a boy or a girl, a man or a woman. Dornish inheritance rights. They don't care about your sex or gender. That's entirely fine. It's the oldest inherits, and the House Dane are in Dorne, and so perhaps she went up there to Greywater Watch with her Dornish inheritance customs. There's lots of these other little things that you can just sort of add up. Going down the Barristan Selmy route gives you plenty of other options and thought process as well. But do I still stick by it? Well, as a working hypothesis, yeah, I think that's the best one that we've got for what we've got going on there. Would I put money on it? I mean, I don't really put money on these kind of things. Will I be surprised if it turns out a different way? I think not surprised, but to see what the extra information we have is. It's the kind of thing that when we get to the Tourney at Harrenhal stage play, if you've not heard George R. R. Martin, as well as the many other things he's doing, is writing with others a stage play about the Tourney at Harrenhal. That will be, I think, the kind of thing which gives us a lot of extra information about this. So maybe that will sway this one way or another. Okay, so I think I had another question here. Martin S saying, at the time of Song of Ice and Fire, if there was a full war between the Lannisters and Tyrells along with their bannermen, but no one else involved, which side do you think would win? Well, I suppose it depends. If the Tyrells have got a bigger army, this is the short version. They've got a bigger army, and are we allowing bannermen? Let me just double check this. Along with the bannermen, yeah. So the Tyrells, if you're adding in Randall Tarley, who's the finest general in Westeros, and they've also got the Red Wine Fleet supporting them, which is one of the top 3 fleets, along with the Iron Fleet and the Royal Fleet. They are probably best placed to win any general battles out in the field. But Casterly Rock is not easily taken. So I think that whereas the Tyrells would push them all the way back to the rock, I think they would find it very hard to take the rock itself. Okay. Just having a quick flick through the chat. I've got another... I had another question in here. Oh no, maybe that was it. The Quiet Wolf, Commander Ray. Thank you very much. Yes, that's what Ned was called in that story. Dinosaur saying Ned and Howland confirmed. Yeah, I mean that's another way of looking at that. Let's go to. Right, that's it, I think, for my chat. Let's go to some questions over on Patreon. I jumped forward a little bit there to go down the Howland and Ashara little digression. Question from Mage Pie saying, hello, Robert. After rereading the first book, I found it very interesting that Ned's POV doesn't reveal any specific knowledge about magic, despite having a close personal friend who is supposedly very magical. Does it mean that Howland never revealed his abilities to Ned? Well, it's possible. But also what is possible is that Howland didn't reveal his abilities until the Tower of Joy. And what we know about the Tower of Joy is Ned blanks that. This is how George R. R. Martin gets around the fact that it could feel a bit cheating having so many chapters from Ned's POV without him really engaging with what is the big secret behind in the history of all of this. And the how he can do this is that a lot of the time he's not thinking of it, but we find that he's traumatized. Basically, he doesn't use those words, but he gets these nightmares about it. He tries not to think about it. It's very clear from his actions during that period that he did absolutely everything to make sure nobody mentioned it again around him. Nobody ever went there again. The whole thing was just completely wiped out. He just blanked it. I mean, this is part of the tearing down the whole tower, disposing of the bodies, and then not telling anyone where those bodies were. He went to huge lengths to make sure that that was all just wiped and gone. So that's the answer as to why we don't hear about this much. I think that the only time we might see Howland Reed magic would be at the Tower of Joy. So it doesn't really surprise me that we haven't got that. Travis saying, hello, Robert. Happy Turkey Day. Yes, if you have had or are having turkey today, I hope it is delightful for you. Would you mind walking through Robert's Rebellion and its lead up, particularly the turning at Harrenhal, through the perspective of Howland Reed? He seems important. Yes. So what I will do, just to make sure that we haven't missed anything from the sort of this Howland bit, is I will talk through his story, just the bits that we know, and then you can see where all of these possible theories come in. So Howland grew up in the Neck, and he learned all the magic and the tricks of the Crannogmen, and then he decided he wanted more. So he headed off. And he got a little coracle boat, and he paddled his way down the river until he got down to the Trident, and then he got out and he got his little boat, and he carried his little boat with him overland until he got to the God's Eye Lake, and then he put his boat back down, got into his boat, paddled, got over. This was a long journey, but eventually he got to the Isle of Faces, and when he was there, apparently, yes, he did meet the Green Men, and we're told that he spent the winter there. Now, this is a Song of Ice and Fire winter. Let's not forget. So we're not talking 2 or 3 months here. This is a couple of years. And he was learning while he was there. And then comes spring. Now, we know this is the false spring. This is not actually the real spring. There's a whole digression. You can go down there if you wish as to in whose interests is it perhaps to create a false spring, because this only survived for a short window of time, and then winter came crashing back again. So he gets into his coracle, paddles off, and ends up at Harrenhal while the tourney at Harrenhal is happening. He gets in there, he wanders around, he drinks in the sights, and then he gets picked on by 3 squires, and basically they pick on him for being a Crannogman. They hurl abuse at him, they start beating him up, and he's not a fighter. Maybe he's a lover, not a fighter, as going back to what we were talking about a bit before, but he doesn't fight back, and then somebody jumps in to save him. This somebody is Lyanna Stark, and she beats off the squires, which, just if you pause for one moment, she's quite impressive. These are 3 squires, and it's just her. She manages to defeat them. So she then sort of picks him up, dusts him down, and says, "You're one of my father's bannermen. We're looking after you. Come here. We'll clean you up. We'll get you somewhere to sleep the night." So Ned says, "You can come and sleep in my tent." They get him a new set of clothes. They sort out all of his cuts and bruises. They say, "Come along to this big feast." He goes there. At the feast, he sees lots of these scenes. A Night's Watchman trying to persuade people to join the Night's Watch. He sees this beautiful woman dancing with all of these men. He then also sees the 3 squires, and he kind of points them out to Lyanna. And then it's like, well, do you want to get some revenge? And we can try, and this is actually Benjen gets involved in this also. We can try and find you some armor. We can find some odd bits of armor if you want to. And he's like, "Oh, I'm not really that good of a fighter." So no, I'm not. That's not really my scene. But anyway, he goes and he sits down at the edge of the God's Eye Lake, and he prays to the old gods for justice, basically. And then a couple of days later, we have the tourney, and the knights of those squires are taking part. And then we get the mystery knight appears, the Knight of the Laughing Tree, who defeats those three knights and basically just should be able to take their armor and their horses from them. If you've read Dunk and Egg, this is a big thing, a huge amount of prize money. But instead just says, chastise your squires and teach them manners, basically. The Knight of the Laughing Tree provides the vengeance, the justice that Howland needs. At which point he sort of disappears a bit from the narrative, but then reappears again during Robert's Rebellion, fighting there on Ned's side. He is then the one of the 6 loyal bannermen that Ned takes with him over to find the Tower of Joy. He is, it has to be said, almost certainly not there for his fighting ability, which seems to imply that he is there partly for his loyalty and also partly for other reasons, perhaps. Perhaps Ned does know that there's slightly more to Howland than meets the eye. But he survives. We're told that he is, when Ned, after whatever fighting happens, Ned goes in and he finds Lyanna and the baby, obviously, and Lyanna dies. We're told that Howland and others, or another, we're told that's when they, including Howland, found him. So at least somebody else is on the scene at this point. And Howland's the one who takes her hand from his and heads back up into the neck and is not seen from again. So that is what we know of him. Into this, we can put all of these other different hypotheses and theories and things like that. But that's the outline story of what happened during the turning at Harrenhal. Kieran McGee, thank you very much, is saying a wee show of love, Rob. Keep up the goods. Thank you very much. Then we've got a question from Lady Pushkin saying, personally, I think Howland is the Knight of the Laughing Tree. He was seen at the Weirwood Tree praying to the old gods, and old god magic probably played a part in the tourney outcome. I think Lyanna and Rhaegar just met at the festivities, and he did not unmask her as the knight. Your thoughts, please. Also, can we have a Lightbringer Azora High stream, please? Yeah, happy to do a Lightbringer Azora High live stream at some point. Right now, I'm really enjoying going through these houses, but maybe after that. Could Howland himself have been the Knight of the Laughing Tree? Well, we can't say definitely no. We don't have enough evidence one way or the other. Is it possible? Certainly that's what Lyanna was suggesting that he do. We know that the Knight of the Laughing Tree was of quite small stature and felt that they had to disguise their voice. Yes, he did indeed pray to the old gods, and the old gods seem to have answered his prayer. Now, if this was him, then the answering prayer is to give him not superhuman, but a real level up in terms of his abilities to be able to joust. And as far as we're aware, I mean, he probably didn't even know how to ride a horse at this point in his life. They don't have much call for horses in the neck, in the marshlands there. He got down to the Isle of Faces on his little boat, and he's almost certainly not had time to learn how to ride a horse in those couple of days that he's had at the tourney. So if he is there, he has had to learn how to ride a horse and joust very, very quickly. Now, this would have to be magic, and this is not the magic that we hear him being associated with. So just to sort of clarify again, he could breathe mud and run on leaves and change earth to water and water to earth. He could talk to trees and weave words and make castles appear and disappear. So none of those are, and he could become a fearsome warrior. So my instinct is no on this. I don't think that it makes sense for him to be there. There's also another thing which there are many arguments why it fits. I think that this is Lyanna who is this. It seems to fit her character. Clearly, she felt that it was the Stark's role to be protecting the honor of their bannermen. We saw that. Clearly, she thought that the way to do that was through the jousting. That was her thought process. That wasn't his thought process. So the thinking was very much there. This gives us an opportunity for how she could have met Rhaegar, because we know that Rhaegar went looking for the Knight of the Laughing Tree. And if she was the Knight of the Laughing Tree, then perhaps that's how they met. It also adds up to why it is that he could have perhaps given her that, or made her the Queen of Love and Beauty, basically, because he knew that it's not just a, hey, I think you're gorgeous. This is a respect, because yes, he technically won the tourney, but she was also an undefeated champion there. And so he was sort of sharing the prize with her as well. So there's lots of elements there that why that kind of works in a story way for her to be there. It's also, we saw that she's a good fighter because she fought off 3 of squires at once on her own. We know that she was a great horsewoman. Roose Bolton says that she was half horse because she was so good at riding. So everything kind of comes together for that. But one other thing I would sort of add into this, which I think is quite interesting, is if we go back to the vow that they make, the oath that Jojen and Maura make. I said that there's an intriguing little bit in here, which normally you get an oath to your king is very much a, I swear I will follow you always and I will give you your due and all this and that. But for House Reed's oath, it's kind of conditional. It says, yes, we will never fail you if you do these things. And these are the things. It says, grant mercy to our weak, help to our helpless, and justice to all. Now, I think another way of looking at what happened with Lyanna there is that she did that. That is her. She granted mercy to the weak. Howland Reed was weak at the time. He was being beaten up. Help to our helpless. He couldn't help himself. And justice to all. She provided justice. So what you've got there is her acting out her part of that oath, and Howland Reed then saying, we shall never fail you. And that is his response. And what you can see from then on is he, through the rest of Robert's Rebellion all the way up to the Tower of Joy, is him playing out this oath. She showed him those things. He's now going to do his part of the oath. So I like that as a slightly different way of looking at this. But I mean, to return, Lady Pushkin, to return to your, could it be Howland Reed? I mean, I can't say for certain it's not. I just think that the story works better from what we've had so far. The story works better with it being Lyanna rather than him. Kirsty Angel saying, I think Peter Baelish was the Knight of the Laughing Tree. He's small like Crannogman and is described as having a booming voice in one of the books. I mean, I think that's the first time I've seen that. Yes, I don't think that his primary motivation is trying to defend the honor of Stark bannermen. Let's put it that way. Okay, let's go to another question from my patrons. I'm just getting myself slightly caught up on here. Let's go to one. Nemo's son. We're talking about the allegiance, the oath of allegiance again. Two things always strike me when Jojen and Maura swear House Reed's allegiance to Winterfell. The oath itself and the fact that Maura is clearly the senior figure, her gender notwithstanding. Do we know the origin of the oath? Can you comment on its possible connection to the wider legendarium? I think I've covered off that one already, so hopefully that's okay. But then you go on to say, do you have any thoughts on the simple primogeniture as opposed to male preference primogeniture in the north? Maura is announced as Lady Maura, daughter of Howland, while Jojen is simply her brother. Major Mormont heads up her house, and her daughters bear her name, but it's not clear that the seat would have been hers had she been older than Jeor. There seemed to be no issue with Barbary ruling House Dustin and not being relegated to Dowager. Janelle heads up House Serwyn, etc. On the other hand, the Stark succession in the Song of Ice and Fire clearly puts the boys before the girls, and there's a distinct preference for patrilineal descent. I guess I'm wondering if the Reed's inheritance structure perhaps reflects different, specifically pre-Andal traditions that have echoes elsewhere in the north. What do you think? Okay, so let's just briefly talk about what seems to be the default. Male preference primogeniture. For those who do not know, this basically is if you have a number of children, then the oldest male will inherit, even if they're not the oldest child. If you've got an older daughter and a younger son, then the son will inherit first. That's what that means. It does not mean that women never inherit, which is an important distinction. Now, this seems to be the situation in House Stark, as an example. And you just have to look back at sort of the British monarchy has, until very recently, I think it's only about 10 years or so ago, they changed the law. But until very recently, it was male preference primogeniture. But we've had plenty of queens going back in history, because it doesn't mean that you can't have a woman inherit. It just means that if there's a man who's an older brother, a brother to that woman, then they will inherit first. So what seems to be the case in House Stark is something along these lines. When you get Rob discussing his will, actually, just so you know, producing a video about this. This is with History of Westeros, another collaboration with them, looking at Rob Stark's will. So I've been looking at this quite recently. And he's talking, first of all, he talks to his mother, to Kat, about who should inherit. And the situation they think they're in is that Bran and Rickon are dead. And then the problem they have is Sansa should be next in line. But she's married to a Lannister, and they're at war with the Lannisters, so they don't want her to inherit. This was Tywin's cunning plan, that Tyrion and Sansa would have children, and those children would inherit Winterfell, and therefore the Lannisters would inherit Winterfell. But so they say, we will not Sansa. Then they get the issue of Arya, and it's Rob thinks she's probably dead. Catelyn thinks she probably isn't. But that's the route. That's the way that the inheritance goes. Even though there is, as Catelyn scratches her memory and tries to figure out some third or fourth cousin somewhere that might be next in line, technically. Before that, you deal with the daughters. So the fact that there are some women ruling houses in the north and elsewhere should not be a surprise. it shouldn't be many, but it should not be a surprise. In a couple of those instances, I think we've got relatively clear ideas. So Mage Mormont is ruling because her brother had been Lord and he had a son, and then her brother went up to the Night's Watch and therefore can't be ruling Lord anymore. Her son basically ran off and quit his job, so she then takes over. So that does still fit potentially under male preference primogeniture. She's only got daughters, no sons, so they would inherit in order of succession. So there's no sort of mystery there. Barbary Dustin is intriguing because we're not told the details of this, because she was a Ricewell, and they're the next big family along from the Dustins. She married, and then her husband went off to war almost straight away and died. He was one of the people that Ned took with him to the Tower of Joy. This is one of the reasons why she hates Ned, and he died at the Tower of Joy. She, however, seems to have stayed there ruling. Now, part of the answer to this is, if you remember way back when we were looking at the Targaryens a few months ago, Alicent Targaryen, as in Jaehaerys and Alicent, one of her laws that she brought about was that you can't, if as a woman your husband dies, you cannot be turfed out of your house or lose your standard of living or anything like that. And so Barbary Dustin is there and will remain there. Why she seems to be ruling is a lot more complex, but she certainly has some strong allies. Ned, probably feeling a bit guilty, is not likely to be opposing her. The Ricewells, the next big family along, will also be supporting her, and she's also by marriage related to the Boltons, so that's probably why she's there. So is it possible that there's some pre-Andal law of inheritance which is not male preference? It's possible, but we don't really see that we would expect to see that more in places like among the wildlings or the northern bits of the north. And we don't get that. It's not the same rule everywhere, basically. But it seems that male preference is more the default than not. Okay, let's go to a question from Maura Lees. Hi there, Maura, if you're there. Saying, other than confirming Jon Snow's heritage as a son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, what other crucial things do you think we will learn from Howland Reed in the last two books? Well, he will appear at some point. It's worth just pointing out that George R. Martin, as I've said already, he said that we're never going to have a POV chapter from Howland Reed. However, he will make an appearance. He just knows too much, and he will make an appearance later in the books. Exactly how and when and where, I suspect George R. R. Martin has changed his mind on this as the story has stretched out, as he's been doing some gardening writing. But probably Howland Reed will head north, and when the Starks have taken back control of Winterfell. That would be my guess. What information is he going to give? Well, I think basically he's the person who's going to tell us about all of what happened in the past. The big thing is Jon's parentage, obviously, but also just the whole backdrop to what happened and what was going on with Rhaegar, because he will have picked up a lot of that through the Danes, and frankly just sort of going around during the war and picking up bits of information. So he will give us a lot of information. Some Barristons has a lot of information as well that he's sort of George R. R. Martin is hiding from us frustratingly. I've gone on this rant before, I know, but the amount of times that Sir Barristan is there telling Danny some really interesting stuff about what happened in the past, and then she goes, "Oh, I'm a bit tired. Can you tell me this another time?" And he's like, "Yeah, okay." Or there's a knock at the door, or he gets distracted onto something else. It is very frustrating, but he is going to be providing us with the context for the whole story about what has been the build up to the situation that we're in now. Let's go to a question from Maura Lee. Another question from Maura Lee saying, House Reed's motto does not appear to be in the books. What do you think? Would it be too spoilery? Now, I don't think George R. Martin has sort of opined in the same way that with House Dane, he sort of opined that their words would be too spoilery. I don't think he's done the same with House Reed, but this is, I will read out as many as I can in the chat. Give me a few ideas. What do you think House Reed's house words are? And I should probably just put the caveat on this, is that the house words, because he's basically said some are a bit too spoilery, makes us think that all of them are. And actually, most house words are not spoilery. They're just good story writing, telling us about the spirit and the feeling of a house. Winter is coming is not really spoilery. It's a very stark thing. And ours is the fury is not spoilery. It's just telling us about the sort of House Baratheons kind of feel. It doesn't have to be spoilery. But got a few ideas. Film Cram saying we hate the phrase. Dr. Debunk, frogs are delicious. Cindy suggesting we float. Urban Lioness, mud and fire. Okay. Dino Sourced, what are you doing in my swamp? Commander Ray, we all float down here. Fang, son of Great Fang, saying Howland's moving castle. Yeah. Tobiah Abramson saying we're magic. Yep. So lots of good ideas there. I'll pick up a few more in just a moment. Kevin Warner saying, have we talked about what George R. R. Martin said about how much he's written this year? Actually, I will just very briefly do this just to provide a little bit of context for people. If you're watching this back a lot later, then probably no longer relevant. But yes, he gave to, I think it was a Portuguese con of some kind, an online con. He did an interview with Bernard Cornwell, who's one of his writing heroes, the guy who's written Seventh Kingdom, Sharp, lots of other great kind of historical fiction. Really good writer, actually, and George R. Martin is a big fan. George R. Martin, in that interview, said that he'd done about 1,100 pages and was finding it really hard work. He's saying it's still the majority of his writing is doing that. The dispiriting thing is that about a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, I think, he sort of let drop how far in he was, and he said, I don't know, 1,100, 1,200 pages in. And the implication is this last year he's made no progress. Now, the thing that I would say to this is two things. First of all, writing for him is not a linear process. So we know, 1 year he's written like 400 pages. Other years he writes none. So it doesn't change in any way, I think, when we're expecting this book. The second thing is that also it doesn't mean that he's not writing. That's the thing to sort of clarify. The way that he writes, and he said this many times, is the way that he writes is he talks about being a Gardner writer, but he's also a very kind of iterative writer. He will write a chapter, and then follow on down that train of logic, and then maybe at some point go, actually, that's not right, and he'll take those, put them to one side and start again and go off on another route. And then he'll realize that this bit over here that he was writing about something else has to intersect here, or which impacts on that other thing going on over there. The story is so big and complex at the moment that he's doing lots of these little trains of thought and then having to come back. And he doesn't just plot out something and then go, no, that doesn't work. He writes chapters and chapters and then gets rid of them. So the example being in A Dance with Dragons, he said that he had the problem of the iteration of the order of people coming to Marine. One example he gave was, when did Quentin Martell arrive? Did he arrive well before Danny got married? Did he arrive after she got married? Should he arrive just pretty much the day before she gets married? And he tried a few of these different things, and he did a few different chapters at different options until deciding he should arrive literally just before she's getting married. That's the one I want to go with, and this is what he will be have been doing this year, going down these kind of rabbit holes and then sort of coming back again. So he is still writing. I don't think this affects our understanding of when we might get this book. But yes, obviously it's disappointing that he's not any closer in terms of page numbers than he was this time last year. Actually, while I'm sort of on a very brief pause, time just to say thank you to my moderators. Moderators, you do an amazing job. If you're in the chat, could you just show a little bit of love to the moderators? I think I've already said thank you to my patrons, but I mean it every time. Patrons, thank you so much as well. Let's go have a quick flick through the couple more suggestions for house words. Dr. Debunks, you sink, we float. Lunar Cascade, Greywater Watches, John Potts, Small but Deadly, Fang, Son of Great Fang, No One Tosses a Crannogman, Cindy, Nothing to See Here, Urban Lioness, We Speak for the Trees, lots of good ideas. Thank you very much. Fear Our Forks, suggests Dr. Debunk. Okay, I will leave those be, but let's go back to some questions from my patrons. Diego Godoy saying, Hola, Robert. Hola. Do you think, after all of what happened at the Tower of Joy, Ned and Howland had an agreement to never meet again? Could this be why we haven't seen Howland yet, but rather only his kids? An agreement not to meet again is probably the wrong way of saying it. I think, particularly if you go down this Howland and Ashara route, I think an agreement that he would stay in the neck for Ashara's own safety. That's the key point here. That's why she would be killed by Robert Baratheon, but he has given her a place of safety in the neck. That I'm definitely they're in line with. The agreeing never to meet again, I suspect not. They kept in contact. Ned wrote to him quite a few times, we're told. But Ned always gives the impression of being happy just leaving all of that stuff behind. He started again. He's made his decision. He took the baby up. He said it was his. He's taken whatever flack he thinks he needs to take for that. He started his own family. He's moved on. He doesn't want to be thinking about the past anymore. And so I think he's okay with it. I think Howland Reed is okay. I mean, the Crannogmen generally do not leave the neck anyway. So I don't think they need an agreement not to meet again. I think it's just they're both happy to stay in their own places. Urban Lioness asking why Robert would kill Ashara. Everybody connected with the with Rhaegar and Elia was killed or forced to run away, basically. Morally, Eddard Stark has always stated he would not have survived the combat at the Tower of Joy if it wasn't for Howland Reed. What do you think he meant by that? On the TV show, Howland killed Arthur Dane. What do you think actually happened? Well, this is a massive question about what actually happened at the Tower of Joy. What I will say is that I don't think Howland Reed killed Arthur Dane. I think it makes absolute sense that the last three people standing out of that group that you have there are Arthur Dane, Ned Stark, and Howland Reed. Howland Reed would not have got involved in the fighting, very probably. The others would. The best fighter on each side was Ned Stark and Arthur Dane. So it makes absolute sense if that's theirs. And so you can imagine a situation where big fighting, and then it's the two of them just about to just fight, and then Howland Reed intervenes and goes, hang on, whoa, we don't have to do it like this. There's another way. That is more like I imagine it happening. I think him just randomly pulling out a dagger or whatever it was and stabbing Arthur Dane from behind. I suppose there's a hint of the Crannogmen being sneaky and all of that about it, but Howland Reed isn't there for the fighting. That's not what he's there for. So what could have happened is that Howland could have negotiated some sort of pause, at which point, I'm going to have to come back to this because I think my video that I did ages ago about what happened at the Tower of Joy, I think I ended up with the idea that Arthur Dane probably took his own life, which I still think is probably the most likely, but it's a long way from being certain. The one thing I'm pretty certain about, though, is that this wasn't Howland Reed killing Arthur Dane. This was Howland Reed intervening to stop the bloodbath. Commander Ray, Jojen was really surprised and didn't believe Ran when Maura told the story of the tourney at Harrenhal. He hadn't heard the story before from Ned. I found that really telling, almost like it was How I Met Your Mother story, not just for the Reeds, but for John. Do you think that's what Jojen is alluding to, or perhaps just Lyanna being the Knight of the Laughing Tree? Why do you think Ned didn't tell the story? Ned didn't tell the story because he didn't tell anyone anything about what happened back then. He never discussed it. And he, another random bit of evidence about Ashara Dane, incidentally, is Kat remembers that she asked about Ashara Dane, and Ned just basically went ballistic, and he went and made sure nobody ever mentioned her name again. Now, you've got two options for why that is. The first option is what Kat assumed, which was that this was because she was the mother of Jon Snow, and Ned was just he didn't want her name in anyone's, his heart was broken and he didn't want anyone mentioning it. Or he just wanted the second thing, he just wanted the world to forget about Ashara Dane, which fits in with this idea of we'll give you safety in the neck and we'll look after you there. So that's the sort of a bit of an aside, which means I've entirely forgotten what your original question was. Why hadn't he told the story? He hadn't told the story because he didn't want anyone thinking about what happened there. So his conviction, yes, he had all this post-traumatic stress about what happened, but also the main part of this plan was that nobody should be asking anyone any questions about John and where John came from. He'd got his story. His story was that this was his bastard son, and I will take no further questions. He didn't want anyone getting to know the story about what happened there at Harrenhal, because then they might start getting into, oh right, so who was that Knight of the Laughing Tree? That was Lyanna, maybe. Okay, so does that mean therefore that, as we know that Rhaegar went looking for the Knight of the Laughing Tree, he might have met her there? He doesn't want anyone going down that line of thinking. So he just doesn't tell people the story. Now, it's the How I Met Your Mother thing. This is the reason why Howland tells it, I believe, to his children, is because this is the story of how he met their mother, quite literally. So it's not a story of how Ned met anyone. It's not a story, therefore, he has these particular happy memories of. He doesn't wish to be talking about that. That's not great. What followed on from that, you have to remember, from Ned's perspective, what followed on from the tourney at Harrenhal was the death of his sister, the death of his brother, the death of his father, the death of thousands of people in an army that he led, and just horrific things. And this all stemmed from that moment. So this is not happy memories for him. This is the beginning of a huge and great tragedy. Right, let's go to a question from Brandy 1842, saying, hello, Robert. At this point in the story, with all the analysis already made, Howland Reed almost seems like a deus ex machina in many ways. He has so much knowledge, yet for some reason he's been hiding wherever and sending his kids to do the work for him. Could he be in a situation similar to Bloodraven, just on the Isle of Faces? So I don't think he's on the Isle of Faces. I think he's in the Neck. I don't think he is... I don't think he's a counterpart to Bloodraven. I think the way that Bloodraven seems to work is Bloodraven stays where he is, and then he guides events around the world, either through people on the ground or through him walking into animals and the like. Now, if this were Howland Reed, you would say that this the reason why Jojen and Mira went up there is because Howland decided that they should go up. It seems that there's another layer there. Which is that Jojen met a three-eyed crow in his dreams who gave him magic dreams, and one of those was a winged wolf tied down by chains that the three-eyed crow was trying to get through to, and Howland figured out what that meant and sent him up to Winterfell. So he is therefore, in that instance there, Howland is doing what Bloodraven is wanting him to do, seemingly very happily. And that seems to be, to me at least, to be how this probably was working before. If Howland Reed comes down to the Isle of Faces right at the very beginning of the story, and Bloodraven almost certainly will be in contact through the Weirwood network down to there, Howland, going off to the tourney at Harrenhal, then looks very much like the kind of thing that perhaps Bloodraven might have sort of prompted him to do via the Weirwood network. So I don't think that they're sort of equals. I think that Bloodraven is the puppet master who's in charge of all of these things going on, and Howland Reed, a bit like Cold Hands, is just one of his men on the ground doing the work for him. Let's go to Urban Lioness saying, I know it's basically just a US thing, but happy Thanksgiving to you and everyone. Grateful to be part of such a warm community and enjoy such wonderful content. Shout out to the mods. Yes, to the mods, of course, and a very happy Thanksgiving to you as well, and to anyone who is celebrating that today. Let's go with a question from Catherine Furseth, saying, and I've got about 3 more questions, I think, from my patrons. Hi, Robert. Going forward, assuming the Winds of Winter and Dream of Spring actually materialize at some point, what do you think Mira's and actually House Reed's contribution will be? A lot of what we expect from other actors are foreshadowed in the text, but I can't actually recall any foreshadowing from Mira or Howland's future impact on the story in the text itself, other than our outside the text theories and George R. Martin's statement that we will see Howland at some point. Is it possible that we exaggerate their future importance in our theories and expectations? Well, I think this is a really interesting one because I think most of the impact of House Reed has already happened. So what I mean by that is Howland's biggest role was what happened, and I think we'd probably all agree this was what happened during the tourney at Harrenhal and the Tower of Joy and all of that period. The things he did there were the most impactful things that he did. Jojen and Mira escorting Bran up to Bloodraven, I think, is probably the most important thing that they will do as well. We've already talked a little bit about does Mira survive to bring Bran back? If so, that will obviously also be important. But in terms of either of them having an impact in the future, I think Jojen knows his end is near. Mira, assuming she's still alive, if you're wondering why I'm saying that, then scroll back an hour or so. We had a really good discussion about that. But Mira, if she's still alive and she does bring Bran back down south, what will her role be? I mean, on the TV show, she just kind of like disappeared. She just sort of went away and that was it. And I mean, I struggle at the moment. I agree with you to think of any kind of big foreshadowing for her and what she should do. There's, I mean, some have suggested that perhaps Dark Sister, but she's not really dark. So Dark Sister being the sword, Bloodraven's sword is almost certainly in that cave with him. My best guess is somebody's going to pick it up and bring it back down south of the wall to be used. Some people have suggested that maybe Mira might be the person to use it. The thing is that when you read the books, you'll find, whereas Jojen is really kind of like downbeat, she's always cheery. She's always happy. And Bran says he finds it really hard to be in a mood with her because she's always just so positive. That doesn't have kind of a Dark Sister vibe to me. So Howland Reed, yes, he's going to appear again, but he's going to appear not to be doing things so much as putting bits of information together or providing information for everybody to put together. The big revelation about Jon's parentage is coming at some point, and this can come from a number of different ways, but the one that people will believe the most is an eyewitness, Howland Reed. And so it's all very well and good if Bran suddenly turns around and says, "Hey guys, I've just been going through this weirwood tree here, and I went back and I had a look at what happened, and you'll never guess, but Jon is actually." They could do that, but to most people, it's like, really? Okay, is that true? If Howland Reed, who the Northerners will know, and they will know that he was there, and they will know that he was close friends with Ned Stark. If he suddenly turns up and says, "Okay, so this is what happened, and this is who he is," and maybe even providing some evidence. Don't know what evidence that could be, but maybe he could provide some sort of evidence. And here's the dragon's egg that they left with him. I don't know. I've just made that up. But that would be the kind of thing that could actually persuade people. So that, I think, is his big role, which means that, yes, the House Reed have got a role to play in the future, but it's all about what has happened in the past, in my general view, or mostly about what's happened in the past. Right, let's go to Alhad asking, when do you expect to see Howland Reed? I think in terms of impact on the story, I think we have, well, as I said a bit before, I think George R. R. Martin has changed his mind on this several times while writing the book. So for us to be not 100% sure is fair. But in order for the story to work best, I think that John has to come back first. Then he has to go down to Winterfell and then be made King of the North in some way. And it's only after that, in some fashion, that he learns of his parentage. So that's the iteration that I think works best, which means that probably not in the Winds of Winter. It would not surprise me in the slightest if we don't see Howland Reed appear until The Dream of Spring. And he should appear at just the right time. And I don't know whether the same iteration will be in the books as it was on the show. Let's deal with the others, and then we'll have, oh, by the way, John, well, actually, on the show they did that first, and then we get the dealing with the others, and then the going south. But it's only when we get into that interaction with Dany, I think, the hints are there. There is the foreshadowing that Dany and John will get together, and I think the story works best if it only happens with he only learns about his heritage after that starts to be a thing. And Dany is almost certainly not going to arrive in Westeros or Dragonstone or wherever she lands until the very end of this next book. Carl Karsnark saying Howland has to help to get Ned's bones back. Right, yes, they're probably with him at the moment. But that doesn't mean that he has to personally be escorting them up. And last question from my patrons. So now is the time to drop any more questions into the chat. I'll try and pick up as many as I can. Michelle Ramos saying, hi, Robert. I hope all is well with you and Dan the dog. Yes, thank you. I have a few questions about House Reed. Let's pick these one off, just see whether I think most of this I've covered already. But what role do you foresee Howland playing in revealing the truth about John? I just answered that. But how magical is he, and how powerful is the Greenseer magic in him? I think his magic as a Greenseer is not as powerful. I think he's got Crannogman magic, but he's got a little bit. He was taught a bit more by the Green Men while he was on the Isle of Faces. Greywater Watch is said to be a floating castle and never stays in the same place. Does that have something to do with the Children of the Forest bloodline and the magic of the Children of the Forest? Well, yeah, I think it can do. Whether this is magical, whether this is put around on poles, I think that they will hold that in some kind of fuzzy in-between world where it doesn't actually matter the extent to which this is taken around. They are so connected to their habitat that the exact mechanism, whether it is magic or not magic, actually doesn't really matter. Okay, let's go and pick up a few things in the chat. Gaz Coleman saying House Dane Island gives kind of Isle of Avalon vibes, where the Christ Chalice was meant to be eternal life, oldest house in Westeros, immortals. That's quite interesting. Yes, Isle of Avalon is sort of an Arthurian myth as much as anything else. Is there any kind of significance there? I mean, maybe a little bit. I don't think the sort of the eternal life thing seems to work for House Reed, but as a place of safety amidst the sort of a land or not even a land, a marshland around them that has a kind of a magical ethereal quality that people disappear into and then emerge back sometime later, but with the truth that is very much on the nose. Howland Reed will emerge with some big truths to tell. Mage Mormont, Gelbert Glover will emerge with truths to tell about Robb Stark's will. Probably Hallis Mollen will emerge with Ned Stark's bones. So there's some significant things will emerge from there. Rabbi Asson saying, is there something going on between Mira and Bran? Bran is still a child, but he's getting a crush on her. George R. R. Martin he heads into some quite disturbing territory, thought processes sometimes. So with Bran, who has now started to get to the habit of walking into Hodor, and he's now starting to wonder, maybe what if I walk into Hodor? That it's a thought process which is not good to go down, and tells us how, or shows us how, Bran has not been trained in his walking. This is a complete digression, but I think it's an important one. The Starks, they all can walk, skin change into their direwolves, but none of them have been trained in any way or told what the rules are. And you get Varamir Sixskins, who is a really unlikable character, but it's very clear we're given a POV prologue for him, and it's very clear that there's rules on these things that you're not supposed to do as a skin changer, and we see Bran break at least 2 of them simply because nobody's told him. We get Jojen sort of saying, I really don't think you should spend quite that long walking into summer. But he's not there. He can't. He's not a warg himself. He can't speak from experience. And clearly Bloodraven is not focusing on that side with Bran, and he's half not there anyway. So none of these Starks have got any kind of training in this, and that's why you will see some weird things start going on. Arya is walking into cats now, not even thinking about it. Jon, I think, will find him instinctively walking into Ghost after he gets stabbed to death. And Rickon is going to turn half wolf. That's almost certainly where it's going, because who's going to be telling him not to be warging? I mean, Osha's there, but she's not a skin changer either, and they're going to be living out in the wild over in Skagos. It's not going to be good. Let's Luna Cascade. Are there any other high fantasy TV shows that I'd recommend? High fantasy TV shows. There aren't that many around. I mean, there's sort of the big 3 obvious ones that I cover, obviously. I think, House of the Dragon is probably the best out there. I'll just throw that out into the chat if there's any other high fantasy. One thing that I have watched, it's an anime, but a really good one, Castlevania, which is on Netflix. There's a new Castlevania Noir, perhaps, which I haven't seen, but Castlevania itself is excellent. There we go. That's a recommendation there. Carl Karsnak saying the Isle of Avalon is where Excalibur was made, just like where the Sword of the Morning was made. which that puts that down at a different island. This actually, though, interestingly enough, this does add to the island theory, which if you've not come across before, I mean, I sort of call it my island theory. I've not heard any other people talking about this, but it's certainly noticeable. It's an observation, really, rather than a theory, that some of the places that have the things on them that are potentially most important when it comes to fighting the others are islands. So, for example, where is Dawn? The sword Dawn is on an island, Starfall Island, down with House Dane. What about a mine where you can get dragon glass, the thing which we know is useful for killing the others? Well, that's on Dragonstone, an island. What about the Weirwood network? Where's their home base? It's an island. And again, here we find Howland Reed on an island, a Crannog. So, and he's the person who can sort of identify who John is, which may well turn out to be very important. So there's there are levels to this, but extra, and another island that contains something important. Let's just have a quick flick through. Terra Incognita saying there could be skin changes on Skagos. There could. Whether any of them would take Rickon under their wing and literally or figuratively and help train him, I think is a very different idea. And Carl Carsnock just with the recommendation, a good new anime on Netflix called Blue Eye Samurai. That's good. Yeah, I don't know it, but I'm sure Carl is a good person to recommend things. Okay, with that, let's just say, oh yeah, somebody was saying that if I get my head just perfect, then it looks like my hair fits Mira's hair. It does. That's great. Anyway, so things coming up. I've got a very random video coming out tomorrow, which is an introduction to Doctor Who. Doctor Who, for those who do not know, it's Doctor Who today, as I'm recording this, Doctor Who's 60th birthday, and they've done a few specials which are coming out over the next few weeks, and I thought I'd just do something completely different. So if you're not into Doctor Who and aren't not wanting to be into Doctor Who, don't worry. Normal videos resume again on Monday. I've told you I've got one coming out about Robb Stark's will, and I've just started writing one about what did Stannis actually believe. I get asked this quite a few times actually. Did Stannis, or does Stannis actually believe Melisandre and they're all about him being, Azor Ahai reborn, or is he just like going along with it because he wants the power? So yeah, that's another video I've got coming along, and various other things in the works. But if you are here wanting more of these live streams, then appearing somewhere around here is going to be a link to that. If you would like to support this channel, the best way to do that is via Patreon. The link is somewhere around here. Oh, and while I remember, probably somewhere down there is a link to the merch. And last week I was wearing that lovely Christmas merch, which I believe there's a Black Friday sale on tomorrow. So if you want to get some merch, go and check that out. Okay, that's it for this time. I'll be back next week. Not sure what with yet, but probably another one of these, maybe even House Stark. Take care, everyone. I shall see you again next time.